I'm Eric from Longbox Review.
I'm Peter from the Daily Rios, and this is episode 5 of Eric and Peter's Legion Project Podcast. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Legion Project Podcast. This is Peter.
And I am Eric. Hey, Peter.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
Much better now that we are talking again about the Legion.
Happy belated birthday, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
way belated.
That's all right. I could stand to forget about the last few birthdays since I'm starting to get up there.
I feel you. I feel you on that. So we're here, episode 5, Legion of Superheroes, issue number 5 of the Baxter run. This is it. This is the end of the Eye for an Eye storyline. Everything that we've been leading up to for the first 4 episodes, for the first 4 issues. Kicking off the Baxter Run series. So I'm very curious to hear your reaction, and as always, very curious to hear listeners' reactions as well once they hear this episode.
Yeah. This has been an interesting journey with you, Peter, so far, and especially since I just listened to our discussion for episode 4 right before we released it. And which was in real time, I guess, just within the last 2 weeks. And it was interesting because we had recorded that episode back in November, but we couldn't get it released until just a couple weeks ago. And hearing us talk about that particular issue as we did got me really excited to talk about this issue.
Oh, good.
Even though I know I came across last episode as maybe a tad harsh on that particular issue.
You know, I have to say too, in our show notes, actually we didn't even really get show notes together for this episode, but in the past, there's a section that is like an addendum to a previous episode. And one of the things I was going to talk about, and we'll save it more for the end of the episode, but since you mentioned it, yeah, we recorded that last episode in November. I didn't get a chance to edit it together until February, or January, I should say. And it was interesting to hear our comments on both the Bendis coming to DC and the Legion on Supergirl, because both of those things have moved forward since that episode. And it was just funny to hear comments, thoughts about topics that had already aged by 2 months, you know. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of fun. But yeah.
Did you want to touch on, since the Legion episode in Supergirl, did you want to touch on that at all on this episode, or save it for later?
Let's save it for the end. Yeah, let's.
Okay.
Because I want to talk about let's jump into issue 5 right away. And that way people, if they're listening to all 5 episodes at once, they can get our culmination of this opening story arc right away. Mm-hmm. So we'll put a pin in that and we'll come back to it.
Sounds good.
Good. As always, though, we should thank the composer of our opening theme song, Lost City. The composer is RhoMusic, which you can find in our show notes. We'll have links on YouTube and Twitter to their YouTube and Twitter for letting us use the song for our podcast theme song.
Yeah, always appreciated.
Let's break format a little bit, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I'm throwing a curveball at you.
I'm nervous now.
No, don't be nervous. You usually like to read the credits and read the synopsis. Let's start there. So let's why don't you give a rundown of the credits, and I assume you have a synopsis on hand for this issue. So.
I don't, so I can wing it.
Oh, okay, sure.
Unless you want to do it.
No, we'll have you. Yeah, we'll both do it. So
okay. We'll string it together.
Yeah, go ahead and do the credits there on the page.
So this is issue number 5. An Eye for an Eye, a Villain for a Hero is the title. Written and plotted by Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen, who is also credited as consulting artist. With Steve Lytle and Larry Malstead as artists, John Costanza as letterer, Carl Gafford as colorist, and Karen Berger is our editor.
Mm-hmm. Synopsis-wise, we're coming right off of the heels of the previous issue where Karate Kid sacrificed his life in an attempt to save his wife's planet of Orlando. And this scene opens with her mourning her, fairly recently married husband, right? While the Legion of Supervillains are ready to attack. So she's standing off against the Legion of Supervillains. Here comes Ayla with her once again restored lightning powers as Lightning Lass. She's also going to go up against the Legion of Supervillains because that's all who's left. But it all gets interrupted by Lightning Lord, who still wants to have his little family squabble with his sister. And, of course, they duke it out. In the meantime, we have an interlude with the Legion of Superheroes back in our universe because the planet of Orlando disappeared, which is Queen Projectra's planet. So they're just sort of standing around, and then they get a visit from the science police, and they say, hey, we need you on another mission. So they basically get pulled out of the story, leaving only 4 of them behind to wait to see what has happened to their fellow Legionnaires and to the other Legion of Supervillains. And then we go back to Limbo, which is where Orlando is, and the Legion of Supervillains get the beat down by just a small band of Legion of Superheroes who have had enough, more or less. So we get some little battles here and there. We get the big confrontation, probably the biggest thing that I assume we'll talk about in this issue, between Queen Projectra and Nemesis Kid, who is partially responsible for the death of Karate Kid in last issue. And then there is an outcome to that is kind of shocking, at least for that time. The Legionnaires that are just waiting in our universe find out that there is no way to Limbo. Oddly enough, Brainiac 5 doesn't understand the technology that transported the planet and those Legionnaires to Limbo. So they're just going to wait it out, and basically those Legionnaires are on their own. And then we get a resolution to the story where Queen Projectra decides that without her husband, with him now being dead, she has no more ties to the United Planets, and she just yoinks her planet right out of Limbo and right out of our dimension altogether to parts unknown, leaving 5 stranded Legionnaires floating in Limbo, lost and with no idea how the hell they're going to get home. And then we have the epilogue on Orlando from the point of view of 2 royal guards who are looking at the funeral pyre for Karate Kid and also observing 2 other things that are there, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So the epilogue is kind of like a looking at this. It's almost like looking at this story from a point of view that is kind of reflective of maybe what readers might even think. So I don't want to put too much more editorializing on it, but I'm sure we'll talk about that epilogue as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And that's basically the issue. That's the wrap up of these first 5 issues. And I'm sure we'll have much to say. So when I said let's break format, really I just thought, why don't we just go, because we are always assuming that listeners are reading this story with us, prior to us releasing this episode. Let's just jump into it. Let's just jump into our big thoughts about this issue, about the storyline in general, and then once we get through like that discussion, then we can go through like what more specific things, within the issue, or certain scenes or dialogue bits or the epilogue or whatever. Because I'm sort of interested to hear what you had to say, especially after what you said a little bit earlier, in comparison to issue 4. What did you think of this issue as the wrap up, or just as the issue itself? So let's just start. Let's go big.
Okay. Well, it is a big issue after all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the listeners know, Peter, and a reminder for everyone, at least for me, I am coming back to this Baxter run of the Legion of Superheroes after many, many years. I read this first storyline, the Eye for an Eye storyline, but I haven't read it in literally decades until Peter and I started going at this. And so I have forgotten much of what I read, and so I'm only looking at this issue by issue, reading each issue by itself. I'm not reading ahead. And so when I got to the end of this issue, I think I immediately texted Peter and said, "That's how it ends." And considering, as I said, how I was kind of critical of issue number 4 in general, I have some bones to pick with this issue as well, but not nearly as much as I did with issue 4. And so, as the ending piece of this 5-part story, I really enjoyed it for the most part. And there's some really big themes that get brought up here, and there's some really interesting character development is the word I want to use, but I don't know if that's entirely an accurate word to use in this case. But definitely some developments in some of the characters here. Mostly, I'm thinking of Princess Projectra, and then really what comes out of that. And so, but then we get to the end of the story, and that epilogue in particular, Peter, and I'm like, what was the point of this?
Interesting.
What about you?
I'm sort of the same. I haven't read this story in a long time. And especially when we get to issues 6 through like around 12, I'm sure there might be 1 or 2 or 3 issues within that span that I have never read, actually, that I might have skimmed through. Like it's one of those, like when I collected the Baxter run, I didn't start at issue 1. I started in the teens and then went back and got those issues. And I remember reading the first 5 all the time. And then I would read the rest of them. And when I look at them, I go, did I read this issue? I must have. But I also think I might have just sort of skimmed 1 or 2 issue that maybe I got late, right? Like I found late. But then all the rest I've read. So anyway, and it makes me, it certainly puts me back to the 80s. And I think when I read it and when I write my notes, I sort of try to put that historical context in my brain, because I don't necessarily want to judge it by what I expect comics to be now. Mm-hmm. Although it's pretty damn close. I mean, I have to say that I think the reason why some of these stories are a little bit not necessarily timeless or iconic, because this by no means is the Great Darkness Saga, right? Like this is one of the higher stories within the Legion universe, but it's not Great Darkness Saga level. And I don't think they wanted it to be, right? Like, I don't think that was their point. But I think the craftsmanship of the book is fine. Like, it's, it reads longer than most issues today. There's a level of writing that is far superior to some books I read today. And and maybe the nostalgia of the artwork really brings me into it too. But, sometimes you get comics that are just like big panels with no real thought to the sequential nature of it. And I enjoy the sequential parts of this too. The marriage of words and pictures, the way that, they make it all work. So, but I do still think, all right, it is 1984 when this book was written. So I sort of put things to that. And so having said all that, I think I enjoyed I wanted a little more out of the Projectress story, especially because I said in issue 4 I felt like she was a little bit neutered. I was surprised at how this issue kind of, again, went backwards in tone in its seriousness, right? I thought issue 4 ramped up the darkness, the seriousness, the heroic confrontation, between hero and villain. And then this one, we were kind of back again to the whole a little bit light nature, the Legion of Supervillains as jokes more than threats. But that didn't necessarily stop me from enjoying the issue. I was just taken aback by that a little bit once I was reading it and going, oh, right, yeah, that's what happened. Now, having said all that, though, I really dig the ending because and part of that is probably just because of certain storytelling aspects that I like that aren't neat and clean, that are a little more difficult, and I don't mean difficult in terms of understanding, but just challenges the reader a little bit, or doesn't always have the easy answer or an answer at all. Maybe it's because I grew up reading Choose Your Own Adventure books and you never really got a full story anyway. So by the end of it, I don't know. I don't know what it is, So when we get to the epilogue, I have a few things to say about that. So yeah, it's sort of interesting to talk about issue 5, part 5 of a 5-part story, because in this book, they knew they had to write issue 6. So they didn't create this in the day of when writers wrote stories for the trade.
Exactly.
Yeah. They knew it was going to be 5 parts, but that didn't mean everything needed. And in fact, they even say it in one of the later letter columns for this issue, where they said, yeah, we know we left you with some dangling bits because that's the nature of storytelling. At this point, that was like the beginnings of it, right? Like they even say, like, in this era, we're starting to think more long form. Thank you, X-Men, for that.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I mean, I dug it. I think out of all 4 of them, all 5, I think issue 1 and chapters 1 and 4 are my favorite issues. And I think as a whole, it's strong, but I don't think this would be in my top 5 favorite Legion stories anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in my top 10, but not in my top 5.
Yeah. It's when you were talking earlier about the strength of the story and how things don't need to be clean. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Is this was written in a time when trades were, if they were around, they weren't abundant, And so, yeah, it was the continual development of a long narrative, much like really soap operas. Although maybe that's a dated reference itself, but where things weren't, clean and cut, and this is your chunk of a story, and then we'll move on to the next chunk thing. And so, even knowing that, I still come at it with my more modern reader's glasses on, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my comment to you in that text that I sent you was really coming from. And more out of a frustration of, I want to know what happens next, because to me, that's more interesting, what happens after this story,
right?
In particular with the princess,
right?
And I'm so anxious to get to that story because one, like I said, it's more interesting, and two, I've not read that story at all, so it's totally new to me.
So good. Okay.
And yeah, so yeah. On one hand, I am completely cognizant of the fact that this was how storytelling was back then, and I'm okay with that in general. But for some reason, I don't know. It didn't sit well with me, and I think that has more to do, again, just like some of my complaints from last issue, has to do with some what I think of as inconsistent bits of narrative, or not even inconsistent, or inconsistent in tone. Maybe that's really what it is.
Right.
So again, like last issue I talked about, there were some things where I was like, why did they approach it this way? This doesn't make sense to me. And there are some of those things in this story as well.
Yeah. When you say soap opera, I mean, I agree with you, because I think some of the best X-Men comics that I've read in the 80s had that soap opera feel, where it was like they weren't going off on adventures. They were having short little scenes in the hallway of the X-Mansion, or at the bar at Happy Harry, or whatever the hell the bar's name is, I forget. Or they were playing baseball, or there was some, romantic scene going on because two characters were breaking up or whatever. So the soap opera nature of it, you're right, like that. And Paul Levitz is very aware that he's doing that, because that's been going on in the letter columns with both this series and the newsstand version, where some readers are like, it's a big ensemble cast. I love that all these characters are getting attention. But then there are other readers who are saying, oh my God, all these tiny little scenes are driving me crazy, because I don't know, maybe they don't know who the Legion are, or they're tired of all these subplots that are going on and on and on and don't play out until 4, 5, 10 issues later. And, Claremont, man, he could stretch a subplot for years, unanswered. So, I really felt that in this issue, definitely. And to the other point, the thing about tone that you were talking about, I do wonder if any of this, especially issues 3, 4, and 5, I wonder if the story would have been a little different, maybe ended a little different, had Keith Giffen stayed on as artist. Because it's one thing for him and Levitz to be plotters, and I know that Giffen might have provided some thumbnails for Lytle, but what I really know where his strengths are is when he's doing the artwork, he might change some things while he's drawing. Mm-hmm. He might come at a scene differently than they originally plotted or talked about or scripted, and he might have a moment of like, ooh, what about this? So I wonder if some of it is just sort of like an unfortunate mix of Levitz, Giffen, and Lytle doing their best to work together, trying to find their groove in the way that Giffen and Levitz already had. Mm-hmm. It very much reminds me of when Perez left New Teen Titans, and it took a number of issues to sort of, the book to like kind of shake out and go, oh my God, he's not there anymore. And this feels weird and disjointed. And then Wolfman has to, maybe he wrote certain scripts with Perez in mind, and suddenly another artist has to draw it. So I wonder if some of that ripple effect is happening, and maybe that's why in my brain I sort of feel, I wonder in an alternate universe somewhere there's these first 5 issues all done by Giffen, and it means something entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you. I think tonally it does. It kind of reverts back to like the first. It kind of reverts back to like issue 3, I think, for me, where all those big battle scenes and there was no sort of real threat, and everybody was sort of left questioning what the heck is going on. Certainly, the Legion of Superheroes were like, "What's happening? What? But then you have this Jeckie thing that's I just wish there was a little more of. Even the culmination of Lightning Lord and Lightning Lass, like it's great to see Mech get the beat down, but and I know we have another issue coming that will explore that. But for this part of it, I was like, oh wow, yeah, it really does just end that quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that was this. Actually, I go back and forth in my head about this, Peter. About what was the most disappointing aspect of this, the end of the story, and this confrontation between Mech and his sister is definitely one of those. It's either number 1 or number 2, depending on my mood, I guess.
Ooh, what's the other one then?
Well, just the really the way, well, it's in my mind, it's all wrapped up with Projectra, but a couple key scenes. One is at the very beginning when she is confronting the villains for the first time after Karate Kid's death, and the way that is, there's some weird dialogue there, given the gravity of what just happened. And then 2, it's that damned epilogue. So when we get to that point, I'm sure I'll have more to say about it. It's just like, what is this?
We're going to fight on that one. All right. So let's go to the opening scene. What about that felt disjointed to you?
Well, okay. A couple of things. Just on that first page, there's with her looking, the way that she's looking on that page, and she's, quietly saying Val, she's holding the crispy fried corpse of her husband, and I don't know, just this may be one of those things where you're talking about maybe how the artist and Levitz are working together and stuff. It's just a weird reaction by Projectra in my head, and I wasn't sure if I don't know. It just seemed like there's something was lost in translation, perhaps. Or I'm totally misreading what's on the page here, but that's my problem with it, is I'm not sure how to take it, and so to me that's a failing on the creator's part for not conveying exactly what it is that they're trying to get across to me by that image. I don't know, how did you read Projectra's look and the way that her body language and what she's doing on that first page?
I mean, she's almost looks like she's in shock. She's holding the dead corpse. The villains are behind her. Maybe she's reacting to the voices behind. She clearly hears them, because then the next panel, she screams. It's a little bit of like, it's a splash page that has to tell 5,000 different things.
Sure.
It has to show the readers that the Karate Kid's dead. She's holding him, which, first of all, that's gruesome to begin with. I mean, like, I don't ever want to be put in that position. And also that the Legion of Supervillains have defeated the few Legionnaires that have been on Orlando, and they're coming to get her. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what was there another way to interpret it, or was there something that you were thinking, or?
I guess, I don't know, just to me, the way that she's looking at us, and I'm probably just nitpicking this to hell, but the way that she's looking sort of towards us in that picture, I don't. So what I expect is, the way the word, what she's saying is like I said, simply just vow, and maybe I'm wanting to rewrite the scene a little bit. I would expect that she's looking at her husband. Here's these guys coming. They're mocking her, and then maybe she's starting. What we're seeing now is she's starting to look up, reacting to this intrusion. I don't know. I think it's trying to do too many things at once, perhaps. Trying to get a lot of things across to us in that splash page.
Right.
But what I really object to, Peter, is the next page where, they say they taunt her, and she stands up and whirls around to face them and makes this declaration about how they've raped her world, killed my man, she says. And then what does she say? Get off a rando, all of you, now. Get off a rando? That's her reaction to this?
Maybe she's saying it because she knows that if they stay any longer, I mean, they did transport her planet, without her there. Her husband's already dead. The next thing they could do is, who knows? She has to know. I have to assume that she knows a little more of the plan than the rest of the Legionnaires because she was captured. Maybe she heard Nemesis Kid ranting in the previous issue. I forget. I don't know. I think that makes sense. She's the queen of the planet, Well,
okay. So that's I think the generous, in my mind, the generous way to react to that is she's suddenly asserting her royalness here, and being a royal, she is used to people doing what she tells them to do, I guess, and so it just becomes second nature for her to make a declaration and expecting them to follow through with it. So I guess I can get that. It's just, given the emotional impact of what has just happened at the end of issue 4 and then coming into issue 5, and we get this. It seems a very and part of this, Peter, is perhaps I just don't know Projector all that much, or maybe we're finally getting a glimpse of who she really is, and we haven't had before. And so I'm trying to interpret what I know of Projector before this, which is not a whole lot when I really think about it, and then I get this interpretation of her. What I'm seeing doesn't make a lot of sense between those two kind of disparate viewpoints, I guess.
I think you need to equate. I think I don't think we can downplay the importance of her planet just because her husband got killed. You know what I mean? Like she has a husband, but she also has responsibilities as a queen, to her planet. Her planet's already been in peril. I don't know. I think it makes sense to me. It especially someone who, if we, and this is something that'll touch in with the epilogue, that very first page of this whole story about vengeance, about, giving over to those emotions of vengeance and what you're going to do, or what you could do because of it. I think that plays a little bit a part here. I think that's something that Paul Levitz is exploring through Nemesis Kid, through Mecht, through Queen Projectra in this issue, and the folly of it sometimes both ways. Sometimes the folly of it, sometimes the necessity of it. No, I mean, she wheeled around on me and said that, I'd be like, all right, I think I'm heading out of here because this is getting to be a little too much for me.
Yeah, but she's faced with how many people are coming? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish, maybe 6. No, 5. There's 5 villains coming her way, dragging her unconscious teammates. Does she really think that her abilities and her status is really going to phase them?
Oh, she wouldn't be a Legionnaire if she didn't.
Good point. All right.
And she addresses that later, right? Like, she does address that later, where she says, "Look, I don't need my powers, to do what I need to do. I just need the strength that's in my blood."
See, that works for me, though. That totally works. It's just this opening scene, just for some reason, doesn't work quite as well for me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I wish we would have seen some of this in the previous issue.
Yes, exactly.
And again, maybe it does have something to do with we just don't know her as a character. Yeah. If I had seen some of this courage and determination in the previous issue, I should say this is what I wanted to see. I wanted to see more of this in the previous issue. That's really what I wanted to see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think maybe one reason why we didn't, it just occurred to me as you were talking, is that Levitz chose to develop and show those aspects of a character in Ayla in this story instead.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Mm-hmm.
And so why, from a storytelling standpoint, you don't want to have two characters demonstrating the same development or growth or reactions. So he chose to put it on Ayla.
Interesting. Well, what about, might as well stick with Projectra. So the next time we see her, because that's the big, climax or the big resolution of all this. Lightning Lass manages to interrupt the Legion of Supervillains from attacking or finishing their attack on Projectra. And I do love that everybody sort of stands on the sidelines when the two Lightning siblings go at it. It really just goes to show the power that is emanating from both of them. I dug that scene. The other Legionnaires wake up. They manage to help, and this gives Projectra a chance to go after Nemesis Kid. And when she does, oh boy, she uses her powers. Nemesis Kid says, that's not going to do anything. And then she says, look into my eyes, no power, yours or anyone's, can stop me. I have to imagine she's just going like Super Saiyan, whatever that is, like, major ultra beast mode right here, because again, without knowing her powers, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that she just gets to a level where she's like, not even Nemesis Kid can stop her. And then she just goes and snaps his neck off panel while we're looking at the corpse of Karate Kid, which leaves a very stunned Legionnaires. And but then she says, look, I executed him just like my royal privilege allows. And she even says, do any of you dare call me wrong? And we do not get an answer to that. So that's how Nemesis Kid gets his comeuppance. She goes full beast mode on him. So what did you make of that?
Well, I wanted to point out before I answer that question, there are many times in these 4 issues where Lytle especially has chosen to focus on eyes. And in particular, it seems like everyone's left eye for some reason. And the reason I bring that up is that we get some foreshadowing of eyes at the beginning of this issue, and then culminating in this is page 14. The scene that you're talking about, and again, just like Peter, what was the issue where there was the continual zooming in on Ayla's face when she's confronting Mecht? Is that 2 or 3?
I think that was 3. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we get a similar scene here, but I think a far more powerful one, where Lytle focuses in on, zooms in on Projector's eye to the point where it goes in one thin panel, goes all black except for this bit of this splash of color, and that's what freezes Nemesis Kid, which allows her to enact her revenge, her justice, and so I really dug that aspect. Just the the whole, it's an eye for an eye. That's the name of the story, and we get a lot of eyes in this, a lot of focus on eyes in this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To the end of it, which is, or the culmination of it, I mean to say, in this particular scene. You pointed out many times in these last 4+ discussions about the quote at the issue 1 about revenge, right, that Levitt's put in there, and here we get exactly that. We get a moment of revenge by Projector. It's just this scene in particular is what saved this issue for me, Peter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because we get a lot. I see a lot of culmination in what has been built up since issue 1 in this scene, and some things are were lost by the wayside. Like I was saying about maybe if we got a little bit more of Projectora throughout this story, it would have, that I think would have been much preferable, much more preferable. And it would have made a lot more sense, and I would have probably had fewer objections to the way that the story was being told had we had that. But regardless, this scene was just, I thought, really well done, artistically, narratively. It's a great thing. I know some people, if I remember correctly, reading some of the letters columns or just kind of reactions I've absorbed over the years about this story, about Projector and not, how could she essentially overpower Nemesis Kid and then break his neck. And I don't care. I don't care about those criticisms because this, from a storytelling standpoint, this is good stuff.
Yeah. Let me read that first page in issue 1. So it says, 2984 AD, technology develops, worlds themselves evolve, yet psyches remain much the same, as do passions, families, friends, lovers, and lunatics, and let not be forgotten, villains, all can be tempted by the sweet taste of vengeance. I kind of always kept going back to that in our discussions, because vengeance, certainly when we talk about the epilogue and we talk about Nemesis Kid's plan and what was that plan, and how everybody can be seduced by it. In issue 4, when Karate Kid went after Nemesis Kid, because the Legion of Superheroes, they escaped from their imprisonment and they were just going to go and try to deal with the power spheres, and Karate Kid saw Nemesis Kid and decided to go deal with him. So he could have just chose to keep going, and he instead chose to go confront him. So that, even that is part, like, it's more on Karate Kid, I think, that he made that decision, and certainly here, we're seeing it from Projector's point of view, and yeah, I mean, I agree. I do like this, and I thought it. I'm sure there's some readers who probably and as we read the letter columns for this issue, not only for this issue but for the reprint issue too, where people didn't agree with it. They thought that's not what a Legionnaire does, and then I sort of think and go, okay, but she was royalty first, a Legionnaire second. At least that much I know about her. Mm-hmm. And she makes the decision to do this, and she even, that's why she says, are you really going to question her on her planet, on how she decides to deal with how they killed her husband. I guess, sure, you'd want to say she's a Legionnaire. She shouldn't do that. But I sort of then have to say, well, I don't know what it's like to be in that situation. I don't want to know what it's like to be in that situation. And I don't know what I would do in that situation. And maybe that's just putting a little bit too much humanity on 4-color characters. But I think that's the point of why he allowed her to do that. Because how many times do heroes get killed and there's no, consequence? And, Nemesis Kid kind of gets taken out, never to be used again. But, sometimes when villains do villainous things, how many times do I hear readers say, oh, why doesn't Batman just kill Joker?
Right.
For all the people that Joker kills, why doesn't they just kill him? Well, that's not justice, and da-da-da-da-da. Well, this story's not called justice. It's called an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
Which sometimes is harsh justice, so, yeah.
Well, since we're talking about this, and I brought up the possible reactions that I was trying to remember, in the Legion companion book that I have trotted out, I think every episode now, there was Steve Lytle's reaction to the that scene.
Oh, interesting.
And so the question was, how did you approach drawing the execution, Nemesis Kid's execution? And Lytle says, of course, you remember that Jackie broke his neck, and I thought, that's going to be hard to bring off. That's going to be hard to convince everybody that this scrawny little girl who casts illusions is breaking this guy's neck when Karate Kid couldn't knock him down. So I remember trying to bring it across visually so that what really won the day wasn't her strength. It was the fact that Nemesis Kid saw something in her eye that made him fear her. And he said he tried to bring that across in a sequence of panels. I got the scene where she looks him right in the eye, and then the camera pulls completely into the pupil of her eye until the panel is full black. Because I wanted to get this feeling that from Nemesis Kid's point of view, he saw something there that frightened him, and we don't know exactly what that was. He's supposing here the strength of her anger, her conviction, and he trails off. So I thought that was an interesting reason from the artist himself, origin for that scene. And I think he totally pulls it off. I mean, what his stated intention is what I'm seeing on in this scene.
Sure.
But not comparatively to that first scene that I was complaining about. So I can forgive that first one because I get such a great companion scene to it.
And we've seen that look in Nemesis Kid's eye in issue 4 when he saw something in Karate Kid too. There was like 2 very tiny panels where Karate Kid's eyes are just like crazy. And Nemesis Kid has a moment where he's like taken aback.
Do you think it's simply because he realizes, oh, they're willing to kill me?
Well, and part of this touches into the epilogue too. When you think about Nemesis Kid's plan, and when villains sort of jerk the hero around, Nemesis Kid just went too far. Like, if he would have wrapped up, killed Karate Kid, focused his attentions not on Projectra, but on taking the planet to this other dimension, which it never got to, instead of, they always just keep gloating, right? They're like, oh, we killed 1 Legionnaire. Look how successful we are. Or let's do more. It's like, no, you only killed 1 Legionnaire. Maybe you should get the hell out of there or finish your plan. And because he's so, I just got to go to the epilogue. The guy says that this is the big question, which I'm sure you touched in on too, where he says, wonder what was so bloody important that was worth all this killing.
Yes.
And I think that if you connect that back to what Paul Levitt said in the beginning, it's not about importance. Sometimes it's about passions. It's about psyches that you don't understand. And Nemesis Kid, who knows what he was thinking? You know, when they said they were trying to connect it back to their first appearance of Projectra and Pharaoh Lad and Karate Kid and Nemesis Kid, written by Jim Shooter way back, you know, he was just holding a grudge that whole time, came up with his whole plan. All he wanted to do, it wasn't about putting a rando in that dimension. It wasn't about the blood oaths. It was just about him wanting to hurt Karate Kid. And he got that. And then he just got a little bit too more full of himself, thinking that he was really going to do more. And that was his downfall. So, yeah, I don't think there had to be a motive for all this, because I think the only motive was that he just was holding a grudge. He just was that, for all of his strength and all of his bluster, he was just a weak person who just wanted vengeance. And vengeance maybe gets you killed, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think it's an interesting epilogue for Paul Levitt to just lay it out there for maybe people who did have criticisms about the plan. And certainly we did too, you know, where everybody, even the Legion of Supervillains, were like, what are we doing? Are we killing the Legionnaires, or are we moving this planet to another? What's going on? Nobody knew, because there was no point to it. It was sort of just smoke and mirrors for him. Just all he wanted to do was kick Karate Kid in the shins. You know, like it was like a very childish, immature way to address some kind of wrong that Nemesis Kid felt. So I like that Paul Levitt's kind of threw it in our face here in the epilogue and made us question what it is, or why did we need an answer? Why can't, you know?
Okay, fine.
maybe it's us, you know, like just trying to put too much thought into why villains do certain things, why heroes do certain things. Sometimes they just do because they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, Peter. You bring up an excellent point, and I totally see it. But at the same time, I read that last comment by that soldier, and I kind of think Levitz didn't know where he was going with this, and this is his way of trying to tie it all up for us.
Mm-hmm. Which could be. I mean, maybe, you know, again, losing Keith Giffen, he lost a writing partner, you know, and maybe the story got away from them a little bit because they're playing the long game. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of times when it comes to endings, I try to work backwards. I see the ending and I try to see why, how did we get there? Why did they decide that particular ending? Because, you know, endings are always beat to death when it comes to comic book criticism. You know, nobody can ever be satisfied with an ending. And it's like, because most of the times I feel like people just they wanted it to end their way as they sort of went along, you know? And in this case, though, unlike, say, like some other event stories or big stories where you do get to an ending, you're like, oh, come on, that's a cop-out. I feel like this is very deliberate. Even if it was something that was sort of changed along the way or whatever, I like these kind of endings, you know, where everybody's just sort of left confused and like, why did that happen? How many times, you know, we do that with real world events. Some of the first things we say is why? Why did that person do this? Why did they attack us? Why did they shoot up that school? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? You never get an answer. You know why? Because some people are just crazy, or some people are just a bad day away from doing bad things. Mm-hmm. You know? I think we all have, like what she says about Nemesis Kid, that you were just a rabid dog in human form. You know what? We're all animals, and I think we're all just a bad day away. Think about when you drive and you have if you have road rage. Where does that come from? That comes from having, you know, just we all have that in us. That's why Paul Levitt said, friends, family, lovers, and villains. Everybody, we all have this capability. So,
sure.
So I have to go back to how he started the story when he ends it to sort of see if it has the same sort of narrative beat, and I think it does. Because look at before he says that, he goes, the soldier says, serves him right to be piled up with the ashes and gutter garbage, unburied. And then he goes, young, you know what? No matter. Her Majesty said it right. Does make me wonder what was so important, though. Like he's quick to condemn, but yeah, he doesn't have answers either. So why should he be quick to condemn?
Yeah, in some ways, it almost seems like the purpose of this epilogue is to short circuit what you would think the projector's people how they would react to the situation, right? Mm-hmm. Because here are these outsiders whom she has encountered some of in the past with her Legion membership, right? And they come to their planet, steal it, kill some of their people, kill the princess's husband, and they seem to be okay with it. This suggests that they're okay with it,
right?
Well, with what has happened, that they don't hold Projector responsible. They don't expect her to do anything beyond which she's already done, and so I guess that's just how I take that scene. It's doing a lot of things here. It's wrapping up. It's connecting back to the beginning, and it's also allowing us not to endure a scene of a revolt by her people. Maybe that's coming. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, hey, I'm gonna go there. Our country damn near threw a parade when Osama bin Laden, when we found out he was dead.
Oh, that's true.
So. Yeah, I think what was the interesting thing is that it doesn't end with the Legionnaires questioning what she did. And maybe we get that, but I don't know because I don't remember what's coming up next.
Well, and that's, I think in part that's what I mean too, is that epilogue sort of takes the place of what we would think that we would get a reaction from the other Legionnaires about her killing, right?
Yeah.
The Legion is well known, within the story itself, the greater narrative of the Legion, and by us readers, Legionnaires don't kill. That's one of their tenets. They don't kill, and yet she's done that, and the reaction is, shock from Element Lad in that one tiny bit of dialogue to her that she snapped his neck, Nemesis Kid's neck. And then the next scene we get between the princess, or queen, I guess. I keep calling her princess, but she's actually queen. Between the queen and the Legionnaires is, okay, we're going to go now, I guess. And that's it. Now, granted, they're kind of reacting to the death of their comrade too, silently, on the side there of that one page. But it's. Like I said, we don't get that. We don't get that confrontation, which I think we are conditioned to expect.
Right.
Between these kind of characters.
And she doesn't allow it.
Oh, right.
She's not going there. She's like, oh, by the way, you guys need to leave because we're buzzing out. Like, I'm not even going to have that conversation. I'm not going to be part of the Legion. My world's not going to be part of United Planets. This is everything. Not only her people and her lover. She also makes mention of her cousin, Ferox, who was also used by the Legion of Supervillains and slain. That's what she says. She's, they're like, you sure you don't want to come with us? And she's like, no, I'm done. You know what? And I'm not even about to put up with any of your sort of Legion nonsense. If anybody wants to have something to say about what I did, she doesn't really say that, but I sort of get like, that's like, there's like an underlying thing of that,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost a soliloquy in the way that she is talking to them with just a couple interjections from Element Lad. I really dug that. I totally agree with you. That's that is her asserting her authority with her teammates.
Yeah.
And showing, hey, I'm the queen. This is my world. Get the hell off. I'm done.
I even wonder if she's not partially blaming them. I mean, I'm looking at this one dialogue on page 19 where she says, my royal command is thus: go in peace, but never return, or never return nevermore. Let the remaining villains be gone as well. Perhaps they may lead you to their comrades and yours. She doesn't say ours. She says yours. And then she says, at least to Lightning Lass, whose bravery I must salute. You know, to the one other Legionnaire that did something, you know, or wasn't just on the sidelines going, hey, let's be Legionnaires and remember our code. You know, not that Lightning Lass killed anybody, but she went in, you know, she went in hard. Where the other ones, maybe Projector might think, you know, had you guys done a little bit more, Karate Kid wouldn't be dead. Yeah. I'm reading a little bit into it, but
sure, but I think that's a logical extension of that. And yeah, you're totally right with Ayla. I mean, she, out of all the Legionnaires in this story, besides Karate Kid and Projectra, she's the only one really with any sort of agency in this. She's the only one that acts. Everyone else is just reacting. Yeah.
And some of that I wonder if that's, and that was part of my criticism of this, is we've had almost 3 issues of the Legionnaires around Arando going, where did the planet go? You know, and like, and I think that's the part of the story that got away from Levitz and company a little bit. Because, yeah, you know, so much so that in this issue he had to have the science police come in and go, oh, hey, come with us so we can go, so I can bring you to the next issue or issue 7 where we're going to pick up where we left off, you know. And part of that is the danger of having a big ensemble book, you know. You got to get everybody on camera, but you got to give them a story, and it wound up being a personal story with Lightning Lass and Karate Kid and Nemesis Kid and Projectra, and the other ones unfortunately got a little bit of, you know, them just standing around. So I could see that being a criticism of some readers reading this. They might say, boy, a lot of the Legionnaires really didn't have anything to do, did they?
Yeah. And you can count me as one of those.
Yeah.
Hey, since we're talking about Ayla so much, do you want to talk about that scene between her and her brother?
Sure.
Because besides the confrontation between Projectra and Nemesis Kid, I really dug this scene. And it's not like we haven't had a fight between them before, but just that scene where they, over the course of several panels, transform themselves from beings that throw lightning around to being essentially lightning beings. I just love the way that Lytle has transformed them in this scene, and it becomes almost elemental struggle in the way that he's portraying them, and I just really dug that, because it's not just the elements of lightning and power and stuff, but the elemental struggle between siblings who are at odds with each other. Right. We had pointed out, I think it was issue 1, the Last Supper pose that they put in there. And I had wondered aloud if are we going to get something out of, more out of that down the road, and I was going to be disappointed if we didn't. And I think I'm mostly disappointed, but what in my brain I'm trying to connect some of these dots, right? These things that jumped out at me, and so I go from the Last Supper, which is we also have eye for an eye, which is a very Old Testament biblical thing, right? What else is Old Testament biblical? Cain and Abel. The struggle between two siblings, right? Now it's a brother and a sister in this case, but it's very much that kind of a setup, I think. With Abel kind of coming out on top this time.
Interesting. And we usually get this fight scene between Mecht and Lightning Lad.
Right.
And here we are getting it with the sister instead. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be an interesting one because issue 6 is kind of like the culmination of it all. So it'll be great once we get to, I don't know if you know that, but the next issue is a focus on Lightning Lass. So that'll be fun to kind of get to there and see how all this wraps up.
Okay, because I saw, I knew that we're going to do a spotlight on, and usually the spotlights that Levitz and company do on the Legionnaires tend to be a rehashing of their origin, and that's not something I'm really all that interested in, quite frankly. So I've been kind of dreading us taking a look at that issue, but if it actually has some ties to this story or this struggle, then I'll be much more forgiving of it.
Yeah, and especially because obviously, clearly, they're trying to revamp her character. We've already had it with Shrinking Violet. Now we're going to have it with her. It's kind of nice. It's kind of taking some of those secondary, tertiary Legionnaires and really making them A-list. Because that's exactly what Levitz and company do. They make Shrinking Violet and Lightning Lass A-list characters after all of this. Especially once we get into their relationship. So, that's a hell of a thing. That's a hell of a thing to take characters that have been around for years and morph them. So, yeah, I mean, for me, I agree. The artwork on this is so cool. Whenever they get absorbed like that, I love. And I said it earlier, I love that all the Legion of Supervillains are like getting the hell out of the way because it shows the power behind what's really going on. And even to the point where Sun Emperor says, "Let me help you," and he gets zapped and says, "No." It just, if it was an animated movie, if it was a real movie, like that sequence would just look so, so, so cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I did want to say real quick the sequence that we talked about with Projectra, where she snaps Nemesis Kid's neck. Those 2 pages 14 and 15, are very much so this issue's covers by Keith Giffen with Projectra standing on top of a pile of Legion of Supervillain corpses with fire behind her. It's very Game of Thrones like, and the other Legionnaires looking on very shocked. So it's good. That's a narrative thing. It pretty much, sums up that a couple sequences. For me, when we talk covers, I really like the Stephen Lytle cover on Tales of the Legion of Superheroes 330.
Yes.
Which is, I feel like he went back and looked at those 2 pages 14 and 15, the close-up of her eye, the determination in her face, all the Legionnaires fighting the supervillains. They even have Lightning Lass and Lightning Lord fighting together. And then up top of the pile is Nemesis Kid in flames, which could either be her illusion or an allusion to his death.
Good one.
Yeah. That was hard to say. But it's there on page 14 where she like puts him in flames. So like he really looked at those 2 pages and said, okay, I'm going to build a cover out of that. So yeah. I have to give my nod to the reprint cover. I really like it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had the same exact thought. It was I usually don't care for the Tales covers in general, but this one I much prefer over Giffen's cover.
Not to say it's not to say it's bad.
No, not at all.
I just prefer.
I actually had some notes on Giffen's cover, but it's not. They're not really that pertinent. But
like what?
But I just like the composition of it. Going from the larger base up through the point of the sword with the flames and how it's. Projectra is the conquering hero, so to speak, because she's standing atop the defeated bodies of her enemies. I dug the cover from it's very very medieval, as you said, Game of Thrones like. So.
Right. Have we answered this question? Maybe we have in our conversation. If we were fellow Legionnaires, would you agree with what you did, or would you not agree?
How much of a Legion zealot am I?
Yeah. Or just, So, like I said, putting myself in her position, I don't know what I would do. But, I think, I sort of feel like the creators didn't give us the option. Like, I feel like they gave us enough to sort of back up with, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, because there were letter column writers who don't agree with what she did. Mm-hmm. So what about you? Do you agree? Do you don't agree?
Well, but before I answer that, I totally think you're right. I think we were given a direction, and that's what I was talking about before with the Arandian soldier at the end being, forgiving her, perhaps for her people forgiving their queen, and mm-hmm. essentially, we the reader are being told certain things in that epilogue,
right?
And given some other things that I mentioned about the Legionnaires and Projectra, I really do agree with you that I think we're being led down a certain path by Levitts that some people are not going to be comfortable with, but we're not really given a choice. It's this is how it is, and while in some aspects I'm okay with it, like with the scene at the end between Projectra and the Legionnaires, how she's being the queen. Other aspects of the story, I'm not so keen on being led down that path. I would prefer some, I guess, moral ambiguity on the page than what we get. And I'm totally sidestepping your question at this point, because that's less important to me than the narrative journey that we've been on with these characters.
Right.
Having said that, all I could say is, personally, I totally agree with Projectra with what she did. whether or not I'm a Legionnaire, I'm on her side.
Right. Or whether or not we could do the same thing in her position. You can certainly sympathize or empathize with somebody's decision without also saying I would do the same thing.
Oh yeah.
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. I don't know that I'd have the fortitude to take somebody's life.
Yeah.
In that way. But then again, if my wife were lying there dead because of what this guy did,
oh my,
or at least in part, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me rephrase that. If it were my daughter,
yeah.
No question.
Hey, look at again, not to go real world, but the whole trial with that Olympian doctor and that one father lunged at him.
Oh yeah.
It happens. It happens. So again, people are just one moment away from perhaps doing something that they, not to say that that's what she's doing, but that's certainly in his situation. And he was even asking the judge, please give me 5 minutes, give me 1 minute with him. And people were laughing about it. And then he just went after him. His brain just switched. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, see, I'll tie this back to what I said at the top of the episode about this issue. We didn't get that from her. There was an opportunity there for her in that emotional state to react emotionally, as we're talking about here. The father there that you just said. She doesn't do that. She just yells at them to get off her planet.
Well, maybe here we go. Maybe that's the Legionnaire thing to do.
Okay.
Give the villains a chance, like to say to them, you need to go. Like, because I'm about ready.
Yeah, it was a warning.
Yeah. Because I'm about ready to rip up the Legion Constitution and just take it out on all your asses. So
yeah, I think you're right. I think she was in shock.
Yeah.
And reverted to the Legionnaire code as a means of coping at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the Queen asserted herself when she could.
Right.
Oh yeah. See, you're doing a really good job of selling me on some of these things I have problems with, Peter.
Don't let me sway you all the time. Sometimes I try to, sometimes it's, and I don't even know if I'm right. I'm just sort of, I just make connections, or I try to look at it from different ways. I'm a firm believer of everything really needs to come from the script or from the book, right? I'm not always a fan of like, well, what if they were really thinking? But, just taking her words, get off my planet, means get off my planet. Or, there's an underlying or there somewhere, get off my planet because we're done with this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And see, but that's, again, I'll return to my often noted criticism of I'm not seeing that connection necessarily on the page. And so I have to make these assumptions, and sometimes I think I'm led down the wrong path. That's why I say you're convincing me, because you're helping me make those connections that make sense.
Cool.
Even if I don't necessarily see that myself on the page, like I said.
Right.
I'm all for making the story better than how I have initially interpreted it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it so much.
Yeah. And, I think I'm very much, I'm a firm believer of like subjective versus objective, right? Like, I think, that's why I wanted to start off this episode with what did we subjectively think about this issue, right? Like the emotional reaction, the takeaways from it, where we both sort of had issues with it, maybe it didn't necessarily ruin the whole issue, but we both had things that were like, there's something that just felt out of place or whatever. But then objectively, so then what happens in like these larger conversations, I start talking objectively, and people think that I'm defending the book or this is my point of view of the book. No, I'm just trying to analyze it to maybe make certain points. That doesn't necessarily mean that is what it is. You know what I mean? Or that I agree with it. I try to just step back and go, well, let me take what Eric said and see if something in the book can help support the other situation, So, and that's a tricky thing. That's a tricky thing sometimes, I think, for listeners to hear. Like, sometimes they always hear the subjective when really sometimes I'm talking objectively, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wrote a note here that page 20 where she says, before your queen, please go before your queen sheds a most unseemly tear.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, that kind of reminds me of her first appearance, where she did come across in those first two issues. She did come across kind of cold and aloof a little bit, very much royalty. She was kind of, sharp. So that whole bit at the end where she's like, my consort and my royal command and, please go. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. It's going back to sort of like what you said, what she knows, right? She knows how to be a queen, and she has to put that guard up because otherwise she'll just break down.
Well, and contrast that with her face, the look on her face in that previous page, and she looks like, she looks very sad, and perhaps even she might break down at any moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get that next page where she's suddenly her eyes are they look very determined and steely, and she's putting that mask up. I thought that was a nice contrast between those two pages.
Yeah.
And again, eyes, the close up of the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Lytle is not being subtle about the use of eyes in this issue.
Yeah. Well, titles have power. Titles have name or have meaning. Like I'm always a big believer of that, and it does remind me of, which I think came out. Did it come out around the same time when the Judas Contract hit over in the New Teen Titans book. The first chapter was called The Eyes of Tara Markov.
Oh, right.
And they constantly were. And Perez was a big thing about that. He's a firm believer of, look, if you have a character that's a little more innocent, like Beast Boy and Starfire, you draw the eyes big, round.
Mm-hmm. Big round eyes, yeah.
Yeah, and if they've seen certain things or they have a darker past or whatever, they're a little more horizontal. They're horizontally, more like slits, so you don't see all of the eye because maybe their eyelids are heavier. And Tara Markov went through all of that. She would go from like wide eye to very evil looking eyes. So he was a firm believer of that. So so that and certainly Giffen, it's almost poked fun at once he gets to a certain art style where he constantly is focusing on eyes. But I love it because it tells so much storytelling in just looking at someone's eye, just the way they look.
Yeah. What's that about the eyes and being the windows to the soul?
Right.
Yeah. I think comic book artists really take advantage of that maxim and try to capitalize on it in their storytelling.
Yeah. The good ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should probably point out the stories that felt, or the sequences that felt like, okay, clearly this is the sequence that's going to be taken care of later. We've already talked about when the Legionnaires get interrupted by the science police, particularly Gigi Cuisimano, who's one of my favorite characters.
Okay, hold that thought, Peter.
Okay.
You have talked about this before, about how much you like Gigi. Mm-hmm. So what is it about her that you like so much?
I don't know. I think I just had a little crush on her as a kid. I just think because she's sort of sassy. She's not Siobhan, right? She's not Siobhan Aaron. She's not Siobhan, sort of like not the good girl, but she's the more level-headed, friendlier one, and Gigi's kind of like a flirt, and there's a couple times where in stories prior to this issue, I think, where she or may even be coming up, where she doesn't take crap from the male Legionnaire, like definitely Sun Boy. It doesn't happen in this issue, but I think it.
I was gonna say, yeah, because there's that weird to me because I didn't have a context for it, where she winks at him.
Right.
We've seen enough of each other, haven't we? Wink, bye. And Sun Boy's reaction is,
She's toying with him. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just kind of dig it. I dig. Yeah. I feel that way about Phantom Girl when she gets snarky to the other men in the group. Shadowless every now and then can come across very confident. I like confidence in female characters in the books like this, in these books. It may be why I like Wonder Girl so much, Donna Troy.
Oh, yeah.
You know. Yeah. I don't know. And you just get I just forgot she was in it. And I was like, oh, look, there she is. Yay. For 2 chapters. I mean, two pages. Like, big deal. But maybe it'll come out to be something. So.
So does this lead directly into some other issue then? Whatever it is they're going to?
I have no idea.
Okay.
That's why I was like, let's list them, because I'm real curious. I forget. This one I don't know does, but the fight between, or the Lightning siblings, that one we'll touch on next issue.
Good.
The next, apparently we will see random Legion of Supervillains, the ones that maybe escaped down the road, but I don't think in any major capacity.
Which, in one way that makes total sense, right? Because they get away. Well, their leadership is no longer, and they did not obtain their objectives.
Right. So
are they just going to continue to hang around? Probably not together. I mean, so yeah, they would just kind of disperse, and then we'd encounter them down the road in some way.
Yeah.
So because at first I was, that scene where they, they're separated after Orlando goes away and they're all floating in the bubbles, but the villains do get away from everybody, and well, are we going to have some sort of confrontation? And I realized, no, wait, we don't need that.
Right. Page 13 is how Zamir escapes, and that's how, while he escapes, that's how Lightning Lass and Lightning Lord get caught up in one of his teleportation devices or portals. So that like I said, that'll be next issue. We will come back to Projectra. We don't need to say too much more about that, but we will come back to her.
I cannot wait for that.
Yeah. And then the other one, obviously, is that splash page of the 5 misplaced Legionnaires that we will also come to. There'll be a story with them, I think, in issue 7, 8, and 9, or 7, 8, or 8, 9. It's coming close. So, with another character that I really enjoy, the concept of. So I'm looking forward to that, to seeing if that speaks to me again after all these many, 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 many years. I think that's it. Yeah, so a lot of little dangling plot. I don't want to call them plot threads because they were basically it's just sort of like new. I forget how Paul Levitz described it in one of his letter columns, where he was like, "Yeah, we did that on purpose." I'm going to look it up right now.
Well, and while you're doing that, it's I always dug that about the comics from this time period was, everything wasn't all tied up in a nice, satisfactory bow at the end of a certain story arc, and that we continually. I guess I appeal to, or I enjoy the soap opera aspect of things never being totally resolved, and we have to wait a certain amount of issues. Sometimes even years, depending on what it is, before things are touched back on again or resolved in some way, if not, totally resolved. So I always dug that about that. And that's one of the things I actually kind of miss about comics today.
Yeah. So it's in the letter columns in issue number 10 of the Baxter run is when they talk about issue number 5. And Paul Levitt says, "We tend to feel that a certain number of loose ends is the natural condition of humanity and a positive aspect of the serial nature of comics. Even self-contained novels should leave a reader with some interest in the future lives of the characters. And here we feel obliged only to conclude neatly the principal events. Others become the beginning of storylines to follow."
Right.
Yeah. That used to always frustrate me about reactions to major event books where, by the end of it, Superman is left powerless by the end of Infinite Crisis, and then everybody's like, "Oh, well, that's a dangling plot thread, what?" And like, no, you moron. The story got resolved. This is just a ripple. It's a consequence of the story. God, learn your basic storytelling 101. And just like he said, the principal event has been taken care of. All the rest is gravy, So.
Well, okay, so it's funny. I'm going to tie this together at a certain point here,
okay.
Peter. So bear with me. So it's funny you say that about or you mentioned the thing about the Superman bit, right? Because when you were talking about that, the first thing I thought of is like, oh, you mean that part in the Legion of Three Worlds Final Crisis tie-in where Superman was trying to redeem Superboy Prime, and then all it really turned into was one big fight between various versions of the Legion and Superboy Prime. And we never get the resolution to Superman's the point of Superman's quest in the first place for that. But I guess really the answer to that, I know I'm going off topic here, but the answer to that is we did get that because he's not redeemable.
Yeah. And it's been a while since I've read that storyline, so I'm trying to think of, because I remember that, because he's like, yeah, we're going to redeem Superboy Prime. And I remember reading that for the first time and going, no, you ain't. It's one of Jeff Johns' favorite characters. It's a brilliant character. Like, I mean, it's a perversion of the Crisis character, but it's a brilliant use of that character. You know, breaking the fourth wall, putting him on Earth Prime, reading the comics. I mean, that's a criticism of comic readers. I was like, yeah, bring it on. That's great. I love that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that story, you know, the Legion Project, you know, in the year 2028, probably, you know.
So I don't know where we want to go next, but my mention of that Final Crisis Legion of Three Worlds thing ties into something else I wanted to let you know about.
Okay.
You have talked about Terrace a few times during these episodes, right?
Right. The very enigmatic Terrace.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this when I was reading this issue and reading this stuff in the Legion Companion. And I got really curious, so I started doing some research for you, Peter. And so Terrace, so in the Legion Companion book, Levitz was asked about Terrace. And he said, Terrace might have been a modernization of a later generation of Scarecrow. If I was naming him Terrace, maybe it had something to do with terror. However, online sources that I looked at claim that he has control over rocks and minerals. And in my mind, perhaps because of the scene in issue 2 where he uses he pushes some sort of button on this control device, and the meteors or asteroids or something, you know, move and try to kill the Legionnaires. But I was never able to find a source for that. And yet every other online source that I read seemed to regurgitate that same idea about the rocks and minerals. And then I looked up Terrace's other appearances, and he does show up usually just as a background character. Once in Superman number 8 in a flashback panel, although at this point he now is colored in with blue clothes and has white skin instead of the greenish and brown tones that we've seen in this storyline, in the Legion storyline. And then he does make an appearance in the Final Crisis, which is my connection here. Same costume color scheme, and you mentioned this, I think, his body being composed of insects.
Oh,
we see that in the Legion of Three Worlds.
Oh no, I didn't remember that at all.
Oh, okay. I thought you had said something about that.
No.
And then shows up again in the Legion of Superheroes number 15, the 2010 series, in one panel.
Huh. So he is sort of like a Scarecrow analog kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that seems to be how he started out, but I think other writers and artists have interpreted him differently. Than intended.
He's a weird bird. I don't really have anything else. I mean, just some random little thoughts, but they don't really speak to the larger narrative.
Well, we did get a couple responses on Twitter.
Oh yeah,
about our talk, and we could maybe just answer those real quick.
Okay.
They're just they don't really tie directly to the. Well, I guess one does to the story, but Ange on Twitter asks, here's my question: how freaking cool is Nemesis Kid?
I gotta say, for an to bring him to a more modern storytelling from those first two, because we both read those first two issues of his appearance, and he was such a whiny nothing back then. It did make me like him, and it made me want more, and I guess that's good storytelling.
Yeah.
I would have liked to got into his head a little bit more to find out what the heck really was the point. And maybe that's something only Jackie might know because of her being able to like almost look into him or whatever he saw in her. I don't know if it works the opposite way, you know. But You know, there were times where I'm like, Jesus, if you would just shut up and do what you want to do, you'd actually get your plan done.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it just goes to show the bluster that he had was eventually his downfall. So, yeah, I did like him. And it kind of reminds me later of a later Legion story, the whole Superman and the Legion of Superheroes with Jeff Johns and Gary Frank, where they update the one villain to become Earthman.
Mm-hmm.
And they really just sort of make him a menace from what he was before that. And
right. Yeah.
And the whole Legion of Supervillains. Like, I feel like they took all those little different villain teams and made them into one big giant team that was very dysfunctional. But yeah, cool. Like the whole, it's Super Friends versus Legion of Doom. You always want the counterparts to fight them, you know? Like,
yeah.
So I dug the whole team, and I don't even think we ever really get them back again. I might be forgetting something, but in a major way until Final Crisis Legion of Three Worlds, like you said. But
yeah, I couldn't think of anything either.
Yeah, Nemesis Kid, kind of cool.
So, okay, since you brought this up, this is in regards to the villains, and I agree with everything you said about Nemesis Kid. We should have I would have liked to have gotten more into his head to really like this character. Of course, then he ends up dead. But anyway, but that was one of my concerns, criticisms of this story too. Was, you know, this whole story opened up on the villains making this pact. We're going to each kill a Legionnaire, and they're trying to do some other things too. And they, many times during these 5 issues, the oath that they took is brought up. And yet they barely succeed in the sense that, you know, Nemesis Kid killed Karate Kid, but not really. I mean, I guess he was all but dead when he sacrificed himself, but the oath never, I don't know, it's one of those dangling plot threads, I guess, or unresolved plot points that Levitz is referring to. You know, it doesn't really matter, but it irks me that we don't get some sort of resolution to that. And I'm not suggesting that the villains should be able to kill a bunch of Legionnaires to make it even more dramatic of a story, but it just seems like it's given a lot of, well, it's given short shrift, I guess, narratively speaking.
Yeah, and I guess maybe some of that is just logistical, right? Like how many Legionnaires are they really going to be able to kill?
Right.
Does killing more than one lessen Karate Kid's impact? The death of him,
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of, I can see that.
And then tied to that, if I may go on, is Lightning Lord and this whole Storm thing, the Storm talking to him, and how we opened up the story with him, and you know the fights he has with Ayla aside in a couple issues, that whole aspect is just tossed aside.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, I mean, he does. There is a reference here in this issue, I think, during their fight.
Yeah.
Go to that page real quick.
Something about how did the Storm betray me or something.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's it. You know, I don't know. I'm sure it's, you know, it's really the answer is he's just crazy, and this whole Storm thing is just, you know, all in his head. But I kind of wish there was a little bit more to it than that, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe some of it could be to go back to that whole Nemesis Kid got all these people together, promising them one thing. So Mech is like, great, I will get my revenge. And he's another one that just goes too far with it, you know, and it gets away from him too. If he just would have shut up and killed her, I guess he was trying so hard to convert her. He's trying so hard to get a twin, is what he's trying to do.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, so you can't kill if you can't convert. He's got to convert one of them, and then he could kill the other one. Right. Like maybe that's how he could think of it. Like if I convert her, then we can go after Garth, or if I convert Garth, we can go after Ayla. But
he ends up abandoning that anyway.
Yeah. We talked about that in that first issue where he rubs his blood off of what looks like he's sort of like rubbing the blood off of the thing. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's something to come back to for next issue after we read next issue to see if there's any more of that. Yeah.
Okay. We do have another one from Sean AZ. Does the fight between Karate Kid and Nemesis Kid shortchange Val's abilities?
Well, I wonder if he means. I mean, I talked about it last issue where their fight, they almost should have been fighting side to side because there's okay. So she mentions her cousin, right? That cousin Felix, whatever his name is. That's from a backup story in one of the Tales books, or I think it may not even have been a Tales book at that time. So it was from the newsstand version where they're on their honeymoon and her cousin goes after them and then they all fight. And I want to say, from what I remember, they kind of fought side by side as husband and wife, as opposed to her standing off to the side and letting Karate Kid do all the work. So, yeah, we talked about that last episode where, that was a little bit of unfortunate storytelling to try to just make the confrontation between Nemesis Kid and Karate Kid so grand that they didn't include her when they really should have. Although the first appearance of all of these characters, she also was on the sideline. So I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, it does in a way. Yeah.
Well, I think too that maybe part of the reason for the question is, we always want the hero to be able to overcome, and Val wasn't able to do that. He really got his ass handed to him in that fight.
Yeah.
So I can see somebody maybe saying, well, as Sean is, I think perhaps is implying that they were really downplaying Karate Kid's training and ability. But it's Nemesis Kid. He's always been shown to be able to sort of easily handling a Legionnaire.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's in continuity, so to speak, for Nemesis Kid to be able to do that. But it was shown in such a dramatic and barbaric way that maybe it makes Val look worse than he actually is.
Oh, Val. Oh, see, I'm thinking Jackie. Why was I thinking Jackie? I'm sorry. I totally misheard thing.
Okay. I was wondering where you were going with that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I think shortchange Val's abilities. I don't know. Like I think we said, didn't we say like he came across really well in that fight, I thought. Even if he was getting beat to hell, he still was holding his own. Like he knew he was going to, by the end there, he could sense that his body was ready to give out, or that he was going to die or not last much longer. Maybe that was
right.
Yeah. And you know what? That's the whole point of Giffen wanting to kill him in the first place. He was like, come on. Come on. So instead of addressing the issues, they just take him out, and they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
It is interesting that the one character that he wanted to kill is like one of the first Legionnaires to have his own book, if not the first.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. In
the late 70s. In fact, I have a note here that so when we do these issues, I'm looking at other Legion appearances throughout the DC universe to see if they do have other appearances around when this book shipped. And the only other appearance that a Legionnaire had was in Green Lantern 183, and it was just a one-panel cameo, because in that, the Green Lantern villain known as Major Disaster is talking about his life and talking about what led him to this current situation, going up against John Stewart. And he says, I've had adventures, and one of the adventures in the cameo is him going up against Karate Kid. And I looked it up on
oh yeah,
I looked it up on Comic Book DB, which is a great website, where in the Karate Kid series of the mid to late 70s, Major Disaster made several appearances.
Mm-hmm.
So, which I didn't know, because I've never read that series. And so the one point, there was a Legionnaire appearance outside of the book, but it was in Green Lantern 183, and it literally is just one tiny panel, one tiny cameo. And then to the larger point, it's kind of interesting that of all the characters, it's Karate Kid that had his own series.
Mm-hmm.
Which, late 70s means they're totally trying to pick up on the whole kung fu thing going on at the time, karate movies and all that. So, yeah. Well, cool. Thanks for those people, and anybody who's been like retweeting or liking every time we put up, an episode up, and they're all like, "Yay, more Legion talk."
Mm-hmm.
Really appreciate that.
Yeah. That's. I think I mentioned this last episode, but that's really, really cool to see, and makes this even more worthwhile to do.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the email that we got from Chris?
Sure.
At this point, then.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with what he started with, which was the cover, our cover discussion. And since we talked about the cover for this issue again, Chris says that or notes that the newsstand edition is his favorite of the two. And I guess I like the classic cover that tells a story with a classic logo, although the silhouettes look a little ridiculous. Yeah, that's what I thought too. As for the direct cover, it's just a hand. Literally, that's all it is. That's right. That's right, Chris. It doesn't doesn't excite me or get me motivated to buy the book. Plus, it makes no bones about the fact that it's Karate Kid who is dead.
Yeah. He says here at the end, this issue, he's talking about issue 4. This issue had some great stuff, but the absence of Wildfire in such a mysterious, unexplained manner really showed dents in the continuity armor of these titles, Legion of Superheroes and Tales of the Legion of Superheroes. You would think that with such a massive roster that both books could go some time without any crossover or storyline clashes. And that's another thing that's been brought up in a lot of the letter columns, particularly in the newsstand one. Once they start getting the reprints, some of the readers are like, ugh, this is so confusing, or they're downplaying the death of Karate Kid because they already knew it was coming, and they're sort of saying this is the bad thing about this hardcover, softcover, quote unquote concept, is that we already know what's going to happen, and it downplays some things. So yeah, some people didn't like it.
What do you think of his observation about the setting in which Lightning Lad, being a lightning caster, is always surrounded by a raining setting? That was a good point. I never even thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, you would think all that water would fry him, but
or at the very least, his compatriots might be a little worried about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and as far as the main event, between the fight in the fight between the two characters, Chris said, I enjoyed the fact that Karate Kid really struggles to get any measure of real damage to Nemesis Kid, which I guess that's a counterpoint to Sean's question. The action is very strange. Some of the fight poses are really strange, and Nemesis Kid defeats him with very basic karate punches. Yeah, I think that fight scene could have, if they had more space to convey what it is they wanted to convey. I don't know. It felt very constricted,
Hmm.
as I recall, and maybe it doesn't come quite across well.
Hmm.
I mean, you get the basic, pardon the pun, punch of the scene, but maybe it could have, if they allowed it to breathe a little more.
Yeah,
it may have had more of an impact.
Yeah. Well, cool. That's our wrap up of the first 5 issues of this series. I feel like I'm going into uncharted territory now.
Yes, I can't wait for that.
Yeah. Real quick, the whole Supergirl stuff. Supergirl TV show. Are you caught up with it or no?
No, I only watched that first, the Legion episode. I know that there have been a few other, at least 3 episodes since then.
Yeah.
And I know that Saturn Girl makes an appearance. I don't know about the others.
Right.
So no, I'm not caught up.
Okay. There's an interesting theory going around that I don't want to go into for people who maybe aren't caught up, that could tie into some of the present day Supergirl supporting characters and the Legion era of the 31st century.
Intriguing.
Yeah, and we've seen Mon-El, we've seen Saturn Girl, we've seen Brainiac 5, we've heard mention of Wineth and I believe even Ayla. And we've heard mention of Titan, which is Saturn Girl's planet, and we've heard mention of the Blight, which is a Dan Abnett, Andy Lanning Legion concept.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So nothing sort of hardcore Legion just yet. They're sort of background supporting right now. So it'll be curious to see, and the show is on hiatus now for a little bit, so we won't even get to the wrap up for a while. Oh,
good. That means I might have an opportunity to get caught up.
Yeah. So,
but only to watch the Legion-related episodes.
Right. So it's fine. It's interesting. It's there's some coy mentions of like the Legion of Superheroes. The actual full name of them, because they're just called the Legion. And Wynn, he's like, oh, you're kind of like a Legion of Superheroes. And haha, wink, wink. So that's kind of whatever. So we'll see. We'll see. How it's played. It's kind of interesting that they're bringing it in whole hog, which is kind of fun. Not that I necessarily agree with some of the choices, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I have to imagine if they're trying to give them that much spotlight on a major TV show, we got to be getting a book sometime soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we want to wrap up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So thank you everyone who's listening and emailing. We're going to go to issue 6 on episode 6, so please read ahead and send us comments early. You can do so at peter@thedailyrios.com or
longboxreview@gmail.com.
There you go. Let us know what you think. Give us some comments prior to recording so that we can actually include your comments. Otherwise, we'll read your feedback afterwards. Thank you for listening and for downloading and all your support. Really do appreciate it. And, we'll be back next time, right?
That's correct.
All right. Shall we sign off?
We're going to do the thing.
Yeah, just do it. Pretend like we're in sync, and I'll fix it in post.
All right. All right, here we go.
And
long live the Legion Project podcast.
That's close enough.
All right.
Good. All right. Cool. Well, we'll talk soon, Eric.
All right. Looking forward to it, Peter.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.